What's up everybody, and welcome to another Pokemon character study. In this series of videos, I like to go in depth and analyze various characters throughout the Pokemon franchise, including but not limited to their appearances in the anime, games, and even the manga. I'm going to be going over a character's personality, their story and actions, popular theories, their Pokemon team, and just everything that makes a character a, well, character. Today we're going to be taking a look at a person who is one of the earliest examples of a friendly rival. Up until Generation 3, the Pokemon rivals were very arrogant, douchey, and just downright jerks. In Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, however, they changed up the rivals' mean persona and introduced rivals that were actually pretty nice to the player. One of the friendly rivals introduced, Wally, is the trainer I've chosen to make today's character study on. You might only know him as that one guy with the Ralts, but there's plenty more interesting details about him and his life that I feel are worth spotlighting and talking about. Although yeah, Ralts is one of his defining Pokemon, as we'll talk about in a second. Let's jump right in and go over his appearances in the games. Wally first appeared in the Generation 3 games, Ruby and Sapphire, and has since made an appearance in the third version game, Emerald, as well as the Gen 6 Ruby and Sapphire remakes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Because he's appeared in 5 games spanning 2 generations, his story and actions are a little bit different between all his appearances. Because of this, as we're going through his game versions, I'll make sure to note when certain things he does or info about him are the same in all the games, only happen in the originals, or only happen in the remakes. As you'll see, even though he's very similar between the 2 generations, his personality and relationships are slightly altered in the remakes. Okay, here we go. In both generations, the player first meets Wally at the Petalburg City Gym, where he's seen asking Norman to help him catch a Pokemon. He's very pale, has light green hair, and when he speaks he seems very shy and timid, which is in stark contrast to past rivals. In this initial meeting, it's revealed that Wally is leaving his home and family in Petalburg to go stay with his aunt and uncle in Verdanturf Town. He came to the gym to ask Norman to help him catch a Pokemon so he doesn't get lonely when he moves away. Norman decides to lend him a hand and asks the player to help Wally catch a Pokemon. Together, Wally and the player travel to Route 102 to try their luck and see what they can find. It's here that Wally catches his very first Pokemon, which to the rage of many people trying to catch one of their own, turns out to be a Ralts. Regardless of which Hoenn game you're playing, he will always encounter and catch a Ralts as his first Pokemon. This makes Wally the first rival in the games to not have a regional starter as his beginning Pokemon. There's only been a few rivals in subsequent games that have done this, but Wally was the trainer who first introduced the concept of a rival not always having to use a traditional starter. After catching the Ralts, the player and Wally then travel back to the Petalburg Gym, and Wally thanks the player and Norman for helping him. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Wally also upgrades the player's PokéNav Plus to have the PlayNav app as thanks for helping him. Wally then bids goodbye to everyone and leaves Petalburg City with his newly caught Ralts. Even though Wally is off in Verdanturf Town at this point, you can actually go to his house in Petalburg City and talk to his parents. It's here that they reveal why exactly they sent Wally to live with his relatives, and that's because Wally is actually suffering from some kind of sickness which he's had since he was a child. I guess his sickly green hair color isn't something he has by choice. It's never elaborated on what exactly Wally's illness is in any of the games, but it's mentioned that being in areas with clearer air seems to help his condition. Because of this, it's been speculated that Wally suffers from either asthma or some form of bronchitis, both of which are respiratory diseases which would act up if the air he was breathing wasn't clean. Considering that Mount Chimney constantly spews ash and soot particles over most of Hoenn, it makes sense why Wally would be moving to Verdanturf Town to recover from this health issue, as Verdanturf Town is free of volcanic ash due to wind patterns. This would make it the perfect place for him to rest and recuperate from a breathing-related problem. Besides talking to Wally's parents and learning about his illness, in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire you can actually go upstairs into Wally's room and explore it. This gives us a very good look into just what type of person Wally is, at least in the remakes. He didn't really have a room in the original game, so all of the info we learn about him from his room in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is only really applicable to the Gen 6 Wally. When in his room and interacting with objects, you'll notice that a lot of his things are associated with finding, raising, and battling Pokemon, and on top of that, everything is described as having tons of notes on them, presumably written by Wally himself. Some of the notable objects that stand out here is that there's a map of Hoenn with the routes around Petalburg having annotations about what Pokemon are found there, and another interesting detail is that there are pins in a globe next to Wally's desk that mark the Kalos and Unova regions. It's pretty clear to me that even though Wally never had any Pokemon or training experience before meeting the player, he must have always liked Pokemon and wanted to become a trainer or travel with them. I mean, why else would he have a ton of books about them and a map with Pokemon's habits in his room? Perhaps Unova and Kalos are regions that he always wanted to visit or adventure through, but due to his illness was never able to catch a Pokemon and explore them. Regardless, the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire version of Wally is portrayed as someone who is, and apparently always has been, interested in Pokemon quite a lot. This is one of the big differences compared to the original version, whose backstory was never really fleshed out that much. We never get any hints on how the Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald Wally felt about Pokemon, or even his interest in general, so I feel like Gen 6 did a great job in adding more character to him through the things found in his room. After Wally moves to Verdanturf Town, the player doesn't see him for most of the early parts of both generations of games. The next time we run into Wally is in Mauville City, where he's seen talking to his uncle outside of the gym. Wally really wants to challenge Watson, the gym leader, but his uncle is hesitant to let him. To prove to his uncle that he's strong enough to battle gym leaders now, Wally challenges the player to a battle. Unfortunately for Wally, he still only has his starting Ralts, and although he's pretty confident and trusting in his Ralt's ability, is beaten pretty easily by the player. After his defeat, he acknowledges the player's strength and vows to become stronger. He then agrees to return home to Verdanturf and leaves Mauville City with his uncle. This is where Wally's story sort of splits apart between the two generations, and in order to make Wally's different story easier to follow, I'm actually going to be going over the Gen 3 and Gen 6 Wallys separately now. This way I'll be able to highlight the changes and differences between them a little bit better, as well as hopefully not confuse anyone out there watching this. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, if you go to Verdanturf after beating Wally in Mauville, you can actually go to Wanda's house, who was Wally's cousin, and talk to him again. He comments that he's not feeling down after his battle against you anymore, and that he has a new purpose, which is challenging Pokemon gyms and becoming a great trainer. He also says that he's going to become stronger than you, and when he does, he'll challenge you to another battle. Remember when Wally was shy and timid? If the player progresses on with the game and does all of the events at Mount Chimney involving the evil teams, and then goes back to visit Wally at Wanda's house, they'll find that he's no longer there. When asking his aunt and uncle about him, they say that they actually don't know where Wally is. It would appear that Wally actually felt well enough and motivated enough to run away from his relative's house and pursue his dream of being a trainer. Kind of an interesting part to all of this is that if you talk to his parents in Petalburg, only his mother knows that Wally ran away and has decided not to tell Wally's father. If you talk to his dad, he's still under the impression that Wally is healing with his relatives in Verdanturf instead of what he's actually doing, which is adventuring around the region, training and challenging people. Once the player's collected 8 badges and is on their way to challenge the Pokemon League, they run into Wally for the final time in Generation 3, this time in Victory Road. When I was playing the game for the first time back in the day, this kind of game is a shock to me. Throughout the game, Wally always felt like a secondary rival to me, and even though he constantly said he wanted to get stronger and that he'd challenge you again someday, I never thought he'd be the final rival to show up in Victory Road. I always thought it would be Brendan or May, who in Gen 3 always felt more like a main rival to me, so when Wally showed up, it was actually pretty surprising to me. Wally seems to have grown up a lot throughout his journey, and alongside sounding more confident, he also shows no trace of his illness affecting him in any way. On the Pokemon side of things, he has a pretty decent team as well, consisting of Altaria, Delcatty, Roselia, Magneton, and his fully evolved Gardevoir. The player and Wally battle, with Wally ultimately claiming defeat. Upon being defeated, he says that he couldn't beat you today, but one of these days he'll catch up to you. And unfortunately, that's kind of it for the Gen 3 Wally. After beating the League, you can go back to Victory Road and have rematches with him, but aside from that, he doesn't really do anything else, which is a little bit disappointing to me. You can go talk to his family and relatives and tell them that you saw Wally on Victory Road, and most of them will be pretty happy and shocked with his dad not believing you, but that's really the end of the Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald Wally's story. Luckily, the Gen 6 remakes actually gave him a little bit more character and screen time than Gen 3, so let's jump back into where we left off with the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire Wally. So after defeating him in Mauville, if the player goes to Verdanturf to try and visit him, they'll find that Wally actually isn't there. His relatives say that Wally is out training, and by the way they talk about it, it sounds like they're totally okay with him training and battling Pokemon. Eventually, when you keep on progressing through the game, you'll run into Wally and his father, not uncle, in Petalburg City after you defeat Norman. Norman comments on how Wally is looking better and getting stronger, and Wally's dad thanks you for all your help with motivating and teaching Wally, giving the player HMO 3, Surf. Wally then says goodbye to his dad, and the player joins him in traveling to Mauville City. Once the player and Wally leave, Wally's father and Norman have sort of a heart-to-heart about their kids, talking about how it makes them both happy and a little bit sad to see their children growing up. The reason this is even worth mentioning is because Wally's father in the remakes is totally different than the original version. Wally's dad in Gen 3, as we just talked about, never even knew his son ran away and got healthy and stronger all on his own, while this version is very supportive of him and knows about everything Wally is doing. In fact, comparing not just both versions of Wally's father, but also Wally himself, you can start to see some fairly substantial differences. The Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald Wally ran away from home and got stronger all on his own accord and willpower, while the remake Wally actually had the support of his father as well as his family. It might seem like such an insignificant difference, but at least to me it kind of gives the new Wally a different feeling from the original. Where the original Wally put everything on the line for his goal, the new Wally always had people believing in him, regardless of whatever happened. I'm not saying that one version is better than the other, just that they have slightly different stories which give them each a very unique feeling. After their brief encounter with Wally at Petalburg, the player then meets him much later on at Victory Road for the traditional Victory Road rival battle. Just like the original version of Wally, he is a lot more confident, and you can actually see a difference when you compare his models. He now has a brand new team, which is the exact same as the Gen 3 versions, except for one difference. This Wally has the ability to use Mega Evolution, and rather than a Gardevoir on his team, he now has a Gallade, which he is able to Mega Evolve. He also has a Mega Pendant shaped like Gallade's head, a brand new badass theme, and some of the coolest background visuals I've seen in a Pokemon game. After beating him in a battle, he thanks the player for not holding back and gives them a Dawnstone as a thank you not just for the battle, but for everything they've done. All the way back to when you first helped him catch a Ralts to when you battled him in Mauville, he thanks the player for helping him grow and progress. After his humble thanks and praise, the player then walks out of Victory Road, leaving Wally behind forever. I'm just kidding, that's not the last you see of Wally in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. That's what happened in the original games, but in the remakes, you actually see Wally again during the Delta episode. In it, you find out that his keystone was actually stolen by Zinnia. Unfortunately, we don't see him anymore during the duration of the Delta episode, but at the end, we find out that the player was able to return his keystone to him, and that Norman gave him tickets to go to the Battle Resort. The Battle Resort is the final place that we see Wally at in Generation 6. When the player initially arrives at the Battle Resort, they meet Wally right off the boat, who gets super excited and accidentally runs through a group of the evil team admins from the opposite game that you're playing. Wally being this upbeat and excited about the Battle Resort, so much so that he knocks over people, only further shows how much he's changed and grown from that shy and sickly kid at the start of the games. In regards to what Wally actually does in the Battle Resort, you can do two things with him. The first is that once you face a Battle Chatelaine in the Battle Maison, you're able to have a rematch with him. In the rematch, his team is almost entirely changed up. He now has a Roserade, Talonflame, Azumarill, Magnezone, Garchomp, and of course his signature Gallade. If you're able to beat him, he'll sometimes give you an ability capsule, otherwise he just talks about how he should improve himself and what to do better the next time you battle. The other thing that Wally does in the Battle Resort is he can actually be your partner in the Battle Maison's multi-battles. In them, he only uses his Magnezone and Gallade to battle, and never switches it up with any of his Reserve 4 Pokemon. And that covers all of Wally's appearances in the games. There's no doubt that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire characterized Wally a lot more than the originals. Having him appear more throughout the player's journey and changing his story so that he's always been interested in Pokemon but never been able to train them or go on an adventure with them makes his journey a lot more fulfilling and nice to see. Not to mention that he also had the support of his family the entire time he was out training and battling. That being said, I still sort of like what the original Wally was. His story might not be as feel-good or in-depth as the remakes, but I kind of like the idea of him running away from home to pursue his dream alongside his Pokemon. Sure, it would have been nice to know more about him and his interests, but from what little we do know, the fact that he accomplished something nobody thought he could ever do while having very limited help makes him still stand out to me. I don't know, these Wallies are very similar, but at the same time they have their differences, and I can appreciate both of them, even though I like the remake version just a little bit better. Now that we've covered all of the info on the game versions of Wally, let's jump over to the anime and take a look at all of Wally's appearances in it. Strangely enough, Wally doesn't show up at all in any sort of animated material. He never appears in the mainline Pokemon anime, and even when including all of the spin-off animes, movie cameos, and game promo trailers, Wally still doesn't have any kind of appearance or counterpart. It's kind of weird because the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire trailer would have been the perfect place to put him in, but for whatever reason, he just never showed up. This is one of the few times where a rival from the games hasn't had any anime presence. The only other rival who hasn't had an animated appearance of any kind is Calum from Generation 6, and while I'm pretty confident that we'll probably see a cameo from him in the upcoming Volcanion and Magearna movie, I don't think we'll be seeing Wally in animated form anytime soon. Before we go over the manga Wally, let's first talk about all of the trading card game cards Wally has gotten. Since he hasn't been in the anime, it's only fair he has a couple of trading cards, right? In fact, it's kind of interesting, but Wally was the first Pokemon rival to get cards based off of him. Nowadays, it seems like every rival has a card, but Wally was actually the first one that started the trend. I guess that sort of balances out how he doesn't appear in the anime. Kinda. Talking specifics now, Wally has only had 2 cards throughout the course of the trading card game's existence. The first card, Wally's Training, was introduced in the EX Sandstorm expansion and allows a player to search their deck for an evolution to one of their active Pokemon and evolve it. It might be an obvious thing to note, but the card depicts Wally and his starting Ralts, further showing how important Ralts is to Wally. The second card Wally has gotten is simply called Wally, and was introduced in the much more recent Roaring Skies expansion and actually got a full art card as well as a reprint later on. Like Wally's Training, this card allows you to search your deck for a Pokemon evolution and play it on your Pokemon. The great thing about this card, however, is that you can use this to evolve a Pokemon on your first turn, or when you've played a Pokemon to the bench, which in both cases you usually can't do. Alright, now that we've talked about the games, anime, and TCG appearances, let's talk about the last major version of Wally, the manga version. Wally appears in the Pokemon Adventures / Pokemon Special manga and, like most characters' manga versions, actually gets a fair amount of characterization and plot devoted to him. Now, don't get me wrong, he's still a secondary character just like in the games, but he has a larger goal and journey in the manga, and he just might be my favorite incarnation of the character. One thing to note before we go over the manga section, but I'm actually going to be trying something new in this character study. Instead of being spoiler free and just giving an overview of the manga section, I'm going to be going as in-depth as the game version and talking about every event that Wally does in the manga. Lots of people have wanted me to give a full description of a character's manga version, so I thought I'd try it out in this character study and just see how it goes. Consider this a spoiler alert for the Ruby and Sapphire chapters of the Pokemon Adventures manga. Wally first appears in the Ruby and Sapphire chapter, Volume 15, Round 185 in Petalburg Woods, where Ruby sees him fail to catch a Pokemon. After talking for a while, Ruby offers to help Wally catch his very first Pokemon, but surprisingly, Wally declines his offer, saying that he has already found a mentor to help him. At this point, his mentor is revealed to be Ruby's father, Norman. Due to the nature of Ruby and Norman's relationship, Ruby hides while Wally asks Norman if he'll help him catch a Pokemon now. Unfortunately, Norman refuses, saying that he wasn't told of Wally's sickness and that he can't ensure his safety out in the wild with both his illness and wild Pokemon to deal with. It's also revealed that Wally is going to be moving to Verdanturf Town the next day to hopefully help him recover, so there really isn't time for Norman to help him. Norman then leaves Wally, and Ruby comes out of hiding. Wally's sickness, which just like the game version seems to be related to breathing difficulties and respiration, has kicked in and made Wally pass out. Ruby takes Wally back to his house to recover, and once Wally is feeling better, Ruby offers to help him catch a Pokemon again, to which Wally promptly agrees. He lends Wally his Ralts for the night, and together the two of them set off for the outskirts of Petalburg City. It's here that Wally finally catches his very first Pokemon with the help of Ruby and his Ralts. No, he doesn't catch his own Ralts, instead he actually catches a Kecleon as his first Pokemon. This is a pretty big difference from the games, and even a huge departure from the standard depiction of Wally in general. Wally has always been pretty heavily associated with Ralts, so him catching a Kecleon as his starter is a little bit weird. As thanks for helping him catch a Pokemon, Wally gives Ruby a Pokénav and says that he can now move to Verdanturf Town in peace with his new Kecleon. All the joy and happiness is quickly broken though as an earthquake suddenly erupts through the duo, causing Ruby to fall into the ocean and Wally to pass out. Wally then awakens in his new home at Verdanturf Town, with Ruby's Ralts still with him. Wally wants to go tell his family about what happened at Petalburg and Ruby disappearing, but is stopped by Ralts, who can pick up on Ruby's emotions, showing that Ruby is still alive and well. Several chapters later, we see Wally appear in Pacific Log Town, and it's clear that some time has passed as he seems quite different than before. He now has two new Pokemon with him, a Cacturne and Roselia, as well as something called a respirator suit, which helps him breathe and allows him to travel all over home without worrying about his health condition. The reason Wally is in Pacific Log Town is for a number of reasons. As it turns out, in the manga, Pacific Log Town is even better than Verdanturf for Wally to heal his condition, so he made the journey there to try and recover better than before. On top of that, Wally has teamed up with an old man to try and find the elusive Mirage Island. Unfortunately, while on the man's boat, they are caught in a terrible storm. While in the storm, Wally is able to rescue a lone Trico who's trapped in its Pokeball inside a bag floating amidst the waves. This prompts Norman, who has been secretly watching Wally from afar, to come out of the shadows and offer to train him on Sky Pillar. Wally accepts his offer, and the two fly off on Norman's Flygon to train. Once there, Norman and Wally begin training, starting with Wally having to climb 50 floors of the Sky Pillar in order to even reach Norman. On his journey to the upper floors, his Trico evolves into Grovyle, and it's also revealed by Norman once Wally reaches him that his lungs have actually grown stronger and adapted to the thin air of the tower by climbing it, meaning he can now breathe easier. Wally and Norman then train on the 50th floor, with Ruby's Ralts evolving into Kirlia, and eventually Norman feels that Wally is ready for his ultimate purpose. He gives Wally his Flygon and tasks him with traveling to the peak of the pillar to awaken the dormant legendary at the top. Wally is able to make it to the top and uses his Grovyle to wake up Rayquaza, which Norman then takes to deal with Groudon and Kyogre, who are wreaking havoc elsewhere in Hoenn. While Wally's able to awaken Rayquaza, the Grovyle he used to do so is launched back into the ocean, and Wally himself passes out due to overexertion and being at such a high altitude. And that's really the end of Wally's story in the Ruby and Sapphire chapter. After the events of the Ruby and Sapphire chapters, he later makes a small cameo in the Emerald chapter and also a brief appearance in the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire chapter. From what I hear, he's supposedly going to have a larger presence later on in the Oros chapter, but as of right now, he only has a very small cameo. And this has been a quick look at the manga version of Wally. For what it's worth, I actually like how involved Wally gets at the end of the Ruby and Sapphire chapter. I mean, he was the person who awakened Rayquaza and snowballed the heroes saving the day. If it wasn't for him, who knows what would have happened. I sort of wish that the game versions of Wally took an active part in helping save the world, but alas, that might have clashed with the game's representation of him. I think his actions at Sky Pillar are something that make the manga version stand out a little bit more and shows just how focused and determined Wally can be. And this concludes another Pokemon character study. As we've seen, even though all of the Wallys have similarities, mostly that they all have some sort of illness and get stronger from it, they have tons of differences too. The original Wally ran away from home, the remake Wally was able to use Mega Evolution and had support from his family and his goals, and the manga Wally awakened Rayquaza and helped save Hoenn. Personally, I think Wally is one of the more interesting rivals out there. Yeah, he kind of blends into all of the other nice rivals that we've seen, but regardless, every version of him is always growing and powering through his sickness just to live out his goal and dreams. And honestly, that's enough to make him stand out for me. Anyways, what do you guys think of Wally? Do you feel for him and his struggle at getting stronger while being sick? Maybe you don't like him and how he was the start of the nice rivals in Pokemon games. Feel free to share your own thoughts and opinions about Wally in the comment section below. Thanks for watching and goodbye.